Welcome back, our dear viewers. As we have promised at the beginning of the show that we will take you back in history, and we are going to talk about the education in ancient Egypt. When did it start, and how did the schools and universities, if there were any, did look like during the ancient Egyptian times? To shed more light, we are very much delighted to have with us in the studio Dr. Mohamed Nabil. He is an Egyptologist. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Nabil. And of course, the ancient Egyptian civilizations was great in all aspects, not only in education. So would you please brief us about education during the ancient Egyptian times?
Of course, education played an important role in the ancient Egyptian civilization, and I would say that it was the cornerstone which helped the ancient Egyptians to build their civilization. And education started roughly in 3100 BC or 3200 BC when the ancient Egyptians invented writings. So once they started to write, this was the dawn of education in the ancient Egyptian times, which was roughly 3100 BC. And if we want to talk about education in ancient Egypt, we need to talk about the four pillars of education, and I call them the four S. S number one is scholars. Then, so we have scholars, we have science, we have students, and we have schools or universities. So that's why I call them the four S. If we start with the scholars in ancient Egypt, the scholars were the people who created the science at the time, and they brought this science into life, into reality at the time.
Right.
And those scholars or schoolmasters had qualifications. So they had the knowledge, they had the skills, they had the abilities, they had the behavior, they had the tools at the time. So they had the knowledge, the science, they had the skills, so they were able to deliver their knowledge to their students, and they had the abilities, and they had the tools.
What were the tools used at that time?
The tools,
how did they write?
They had tablets, by the way, but not the nowadays tablets that we have. They had stone tablets, and they had to carve the inscriptions, and they had to divide the tablet or the stone or the paper, the papyrus.
It was done by scientists.
Yeah, scholars or schoolmasters. I would say that they were like schoolmasters. And one of the greatest examples that we have in the ancient Egyptian civilization, we have, for example, Imhotep. Imhotep, he was the vizier, he was the astronomer, he was the physician doctor, he was an architect, so the physician doctor, as I said before. So he was a brilliant person, he was a brilliant guy, and he put down everything in his mind into paper or rolls of papyrus. And this was knowledge at the time. And later on, he became the god of medicine for the ancient Egyptians.
But how did he get the knowledge?
So to think. So they had to think. And also, one of the qualifications of the ancient Egyptians was the experience. So they had mistakes, and they started to develop later on. For example, in medicine, or Imhotep, for example, during the 3rd dynasty, there was no mummification. And mummification started in the 17th dynasty of the ancient Egyptian times. Right?
Yep.
So this means that they were developing, right? So education was like a baby, and it was growing up, starting from the pre-dynastic period, passing through the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, till the Greco-Roman period. And also we have other scholars. We have Ptah-hotep, for example, and we have the Book of Wisdom, and we have what Ptah-hotep said to his son, how to listen more than he talks. So also education, there was difference in ancient Egypt between education and training. Education is knowledge. Training, to train them, is to be able to do. So right, so they had both education and training at the ancient Egyptian times. So we have the 4S, as I told you before. We have scholars. Then we have science, like medicine, and science in ancient Egypt was divided into two main parts, or two levels. The base level and the high level. The high level was religion, astronomy, astrology, which is above earth.
Yeah.
Then the base level was everything. Math, reading, writing, navigation, and everything. So they had two levels of education at the time, and there was like a drama of education in ancient Egypt, and this was the reason behind the glory of the ancient Egyptian civilization at the time. And if we talk about science, of course, one of the best examples that we have is medicine, the mummification. For example, this is the best example, and this shows that the ancient Egyptians knew the human body, the anatomy of the human body at the time. And in the mummification, as you know, that they used to take out the organs. So they knew about the organs. During the mummification, they had to take out the brain. So they knew how to take the brain out of the body, right? And they kept, of course, the heart. And they knew about heart and the heart diseases at the time. So this means that science in Egypt was very strong. Mathematics. Look at the pyramids. Look at the temple of Abu Simbel. Look at the tombs. Look at all the achievements of the ancient Egyptians, I mean in buildings. This means that they were very brilliant or brilliant in math and mathematics. Then we go to number 3. We have the students. The students also had the passion. They wanted to learn. And education for the ancient Egyptians was a privilege. Not everyone had the right to be educated.
So it was only for certain segment in the society, or everyone, every social level was able to go to schools?
No, it was a privilege. So certain people had the right to go to school. Like, of course, the princes or the royal family, of course, the officials, the high officials, the priests, or the wealthy families. Girls.
They did go to schools.
They did go to schools, but they came from the wealthy families. And we can say that there were 3 types of schools in ancient Egypt. We have the royal school or the prince's school, and this was attached to the royal palace. So it was for the son of the pharaoh, for the royal prince to go there with his friends or with his brothers and sisters. Then we have the public schools, and they were attached to the temples to get the religious education, and it was attached to the temple, and it was for the wealthy families and the crème de la crème of the Egyptian society at the time. And we have girls' schools or schools for girls, and this was at home. So they were the 3 types. And if you look at the schools of the ancient Egyptians, they were rectangular, and also they had like sorts of benches or desks, and of course the schoolmaster or the teacher used to sit there and to
so
give
they
them
had the same setting of a school nowadays.
the same setting, but of course not with the large number that we have at the time, because actually also education in ancient Egypt had levels. They had the basic level or the primary school at the time, and they used to get reading, writing, and math. And they had to repeat standard texts every day to tell them how to write the figures, because you know that the hieroglyphics has like certain figures, so they had to learn this by heart. So they had to repeat standard texts for days, and they used to go to schools starting from year 5, and before that the mother had the biggest role
at
to
what
educate.
age?
Year 5,
So like
5 years old. When they
year
were 5
5.
years old, when they were 5 years old, they started to join schools, tutors, to teach them. Not grade 5, but they started when they were like 5 years old. 5 years old. Before that, mothers had the biggest role to
teach.
Upbringing her sons and daughters, but also upbringing sons was left over the fathers, and girls was left over the mothers. And of course,
were the girls allowed to be educated? Did they go to school actually?
Of course, and they had private tutors at home, as I told you before, in their house actually, because they were, as I said, from the crème de la crème society at the time. And they got also decent education. They got religious education, because if we look at the titles of the ancient Egyptians, we can see the priestess of Amun, the priestess of Hathor, and they got religious titles at the time. And this means that the ancient Egyptians paid great attention to educate women, because they knew that women were very important in the ancient Egyptian civilization. And for example, we have one of the queens who ruled Egypt is called Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut, and she was highly educated. And more than this, that most of the emperors and rulers of the foreign countries, they asked the Egyptians to send them tutors or schoolmasters there to educate their sons and daughters. And also, I do remember that during the time of Thutmose III, when he invaded Asia, he brought with him the sons of daughters or the princes from Asia, and he brought them up here with the Egyptian education. And when they grew up, he sent them back to their countries to rule their countries with the loyalty to Egypt and to Thutmose III himself. So education was very powerful during the ancient Egyptian times, and it was very important. And you can see that also during the Greeks came from Greece, and they got education in Egypt, and they were sent back home, and they became the first philosophers of their countries. So education was the reason behind the great success and the glory of the ancient Egyptian civilization.
What about the role of the priest and the temple during the ancient Egyptian time concerning the education?
This is This is like the high level of education, which is the religious education. We said that we have the high line or the high education, astronomy, astrology, and religion. And of course, the priest was the tongue of God. So he was the one who got the messages from God, and he started to deliver this to the commoners and to people. And of course, this was inside the temples. And they used to get this education inside the temples, and they used to receive the offerings at the time. And I would say that not all the priests of Egypt at the time were the real tongues of God at the time. They had like their personal benefits at the time. That's why they asked the Egyptians or the subjects at the time to give more offerings for certain gods. And you can see that we have different types of priests, for example. We have the first priest, the high priest, the priest of purification. So the priest of purification, for example, is the one who purifies the temple or the monument for the pharaoh. So he has to learn something about perfumes, because they used to purify the places with certain perfumes for the beautiful smell.
It was done by priests.
By priests. He is called the Wa'ab priest or the purification priest. By
purification here we do not mean something spiritual. We do mean something real.
Real, of course, because actually the Wa'ab priest also is responsible for the mummification, because he has to purify the body of the pharaoh during the mummification process. So it's really impressive that we need to learn from the ancient Egyptians how they treated their schoolmasters or their scholars, because it's very important, because the scholars were the cornerstone of the education process at the time. So if we say like Imhotep, if you say Senenmut, if we say Plato, the Greek, so these are the people who created science for the ancient Egyptians. That's why nowadays we see such beauty. Nowadays we see such a glory of the ancient Egyptian civilization.
Indeed.
And was there a number of school years, I mean a fixed number of school years that each one has to attend, and was there any colleges at the time?
Of course, there was the College of Medicine, many colleges, but there was no certain college. There was a schoolmaster. The schoolmaster or the scholar was the one who gives the education. So I am the student of Imhotep, so I will learn from Imhotep medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and I will, he will teach me everything. So there was no like a certain school of medicine at the time, or a certain school of commerce at the time. The school of commerce that they had to be scribes. So this was the first level of education. So from year 5 till 14. And after that, they had to go to another level if they are more brilliant.
So there was around
like
9 years of education at school?
9 years of education at school.
Then
and this was
university?
the basic education, reading, writing, and math. Math was very important for the ancient Egyptians. Later on, they started to have something is called the Book of Wisdom, which is, or like teaching them life, like the behavior.
Still in school?
Still in school, or the tutor, or the schoolmaster, or the scholar himself, because he has to give them his experience.
That was after the age of 14?
14. exactly.
Right. Until what age?
Depends, because he can have like 4 years. This is like a freelance education or a private education, because he can have a job somewhere in the court. He can have another job in Upper Egypt, in Lower Egypt, so he can leave his schoolmaster and he can join one of the jobs or one of the official jobs. It depends. If he is a pharaoh, or if he is one of the royal family, so his private tutor will stay with him forever, right? So for advices, to give him advices for so many things. So it was an ongoing story during the time of the ancient Egyptians.
And from 5 years of age until 14, was that sort of a compulsory education, or was it optional?
I cannot say optional, because for kings, queens, and the high officials, it was a must for them to be educated. All the pharaohs of Egypt, they were not ignorant. So they had education. Hatshepsut had education, and she was a girl. Thutmose III had education. Cheops had education. I assume that Zoser, the one who built the step pyramid at Saqqara, had education, because his vizier was Imhotep. So, of course, he got enough knowledge from Imhotep to rule the country and to run the country at the time. So, it is really very important.
So, if we compare the education during the time of the ancient Egyptians and now, is there many similarities?
From which part?
The system.
The number of years.
The number of years, of course, you can see that we have the basic education. It's I think that it is the same system, because actually we still have the same 4 aspects. We have the same 4S. We have the teachers or the scholars. We have the students. We have the schools, and we have the science. We have the different fields of science and subjects. So it is the same, but unfortunately, we have to focus on behavior, because I do think that we don't.
Did they do that?
The ancient Egyptians, they did that, and it was called the Book of Wisdom. And there is something very important which shows that education was very important for the ancient Egyptians, that the ancient Egyptians had the god of wisdom or the god of knowledge, and he was called the Ibis, or the Ibis god, or Jehuti. So he was the god of wisdom. And this means that the ancient Egyptians believed in education. And nowadays, we have to believe in this, because this will be the solution for Egypt. If we are educated well, we will take our country out of the bottleneck.
Hopefully. Dr. Mohamed Nabil, Egyptologist, thank you very much for being with us and for your perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nabil. And dear viewers, with this we come to the end of this edition of The Breakfast Show. I'm Niveen Ramzi, and I was in the company of Mahisti Rabi'. Many thanks, Mahisti.
Thank you very much, Niveen, and thank you very much, our dear viewers. And tomorrow is a new crew. Till then, it's